You didn't vanish. You slipped quietly, deliberately. One moment you were visible, traceable, an obedient dot in their endless constellation of monitored lives. The next, you were gone, not in the way they whisper about in the news, not as a tragedy to be pitied. No, you stepped sideways into a space they cannot chart. You were not stolen. You were not misplaced. You chose absence like a weapon, a choice sharper than steel, older than language. It began the moment you realized the noise wasn't life, it was static. Every conversation, every headline, every glowing screen blinding you with images not your own. You felt their grip tightening, their invisible hands feeding you stories to keep you predictable. And you saw yourself reflected in their eyes, not as you are, but as they needed you to be, softened, tamed, harmless. That was the first betrayal, not from a person, but from a world that smiled as it fed on you. So you pulled the plug, stopped performing, stopped bleeding pieces of yourself into the endless mouths of strangers. You abandoned their currency of visibility. Each step away was a cut in their web, a gap they could not mend. And as you stepped, the city lost color. Its sounds became muted, its lights too bright and meaningless. You realized this place was never yours, it was theirs, and you had been living inside their dream. Silence found you then, not the kind that makes your skin itch, the kind that breathes, the kind that listens. It wrapped around you like an ancient cloak, older than any empire, and for the first time you understood that invisibility is not emptiness, it is protection, it is strength. You moved through streets as a shadow. Your name, no longer currency in their mouths, began to dissolve from memory. People stopped asking where you were at first, but withdrawal is a kind of alchemy. You could feel something inside you changing, hardening. Each day without their gaze stripped another layer of softness from you. What was left was lean and dangerous. You were no longer made for their light. You were forged for the dark, a place where every sound is a signal, every step a calculation, every breath part of a plan they could never decode. You learned the difference between being unseen and being gone. The lost leave traces, little threads to be pulled. You left nothing. You learned how to close doors without leaving air to move through them. You erased your footprints from every shore you touched, and yet you did not feel small. You felt vast, like you had stepped outside the walls of their kingdom and found the night sky waiting, limitless, silent, watching. They will call it disappearance. They will invent stories to fill the void you left. But you will know the truth. You were never lost. You simply walked off the edge of their map, into a place where their rules cannot follow, and their reach will always fall short. You didn't disappear. You became untouchable. They thought you were drifting, fading, a soul wandering without direction. But that's because they only measure life in the ways they can see, record, or own. They believe existence is proven through notifications, check-ins, and a constant broadcast of your pulse into their glowing screen. So when you went silent, they whispered that you'd fallen, but you hadn't fallen. You had slipped between the cracks in their architecture, a ghost they couldn't register. You learned that the most dangerous power in a surveillance empire is to stop feeding it. You became the static they can't decode, the absence that makes their systems stutter. It began quietly. You started pruning traces of yourself, one by one. Accounts left to rot, old photographs deleted without ceremony, messages vanishing into a black hole of your own making. You turned every breadcrumb they had into ash. While their eyes were glued to the endless scroll, you studied the scroll itself, the hidden hands turning the wheel, the quiet siphoning of thoughts and movements, the fingerprints of watchers who never sleep. You learned the language of omission. You mastered the subtle art of walking through a crowd without leaving a shadow, and with each step you could feel the chains snapping, one after another. They never told you how brittle the system really is. They dressed it in omnipotent, as if it could never be escaped. But beneath the surface it is held together by fragile threads, predictable patterns, obedient behaviors, a shared addiction to being seen. Break the pattern, and the whole machine twitches. You didn't just break it, you rewrote yourself so you no longer fit into any of its molds. You made yourself unclassifiable, and in a world built on categories, that is an unforgivable sin. At first you thought they'd simply let you go, that you could disappear like smoke in an open sky. But you quickly learned the truth. The moment you step outside their reach, you become more valuable to them than ever. Every system, every watcher, is programmed to hunt anomalies, and you are the purest form of anomaly they've ever seen. You don't consume what they feed. You don't march to the beat they play. You are the question they can't answer, and that makes you dangerous. But you are not afraid. The hunt only sharpens. Every time their eyes sweep past you, searching for a trace, you learn more about their method. You move like water through their grasp, fluid, shifty, uncatchable. You begin to see their weakness for all their talk of control. They are blind in the spaces they cannot illuminate. You dwell in those spaces now. You thrive in them. You used to be a number in their archives, a node in their network, a participant in their silent contract of surveillance for convenience. Now you are something else entirely. A figure they cannot log, a signal they cannot map. You are no longer playing their game, and that is the truth they will never forgive. You have become the ghost in their system, and a ghost can go anywhere. You used to think silence was nothing, just a pause, just the space between noise. You thought the world was made of voices, traffic, notifications, footsteps, until you stepped away from all of it, and that's when you heard it. A hum, low and ancient, threading itself beneath everything you thought was empty. It was always there, but it only speaks to those who have left the crowd. You feel it not just in your ears, but in your bones, as if your blood has begun to pulse in time with something older than language. At first it unnerves you. Your mind tries to smother it, to replace it with the familiar chaos you've escaped. But the hum persists. It's not mechanical, not random. It's deliberate. It's the signal beneath the silence. You begin to realize that you were never escaping noise. You were escaping the interference designed to keep you deaf to this frequency. Every word they spoke to you, every headline, every song on repeat, it was camouflaged, a veil, and you were buried beneath it, obedient, distracted, unable to hear the truth calling from below. You start to notice pattern, the way shadows shift when you are still, the way certain thoughts arrive uninvited, as if whispered through a crack in reality. There is an intelligence in the quiet, and it watches you the way a chess master watches a board. It does not rush. It does not need to. It has been here before you were born, and will remain long after your name fades from memory. You feel as though you've stumbled into a conversation that has been happening for centuries without you, and now, finally, you've been permitted to listen. It's not comforting. It's not meant to be. The silence shows you things you wish you could unsee, how fragile the surface world truly is, how easy it is for an entire society to speak in unison, yet say nothing of value. You see the faces of people you once trusted, and realize they've been asleep their entire lives, their thoughts borrowed, their words scripted. The hum becomes a guide, pulling you further from them, deeper into the uncharted corridors of your own mind. And here's the danger. You can't turn it off anymore. The signal has marked you. It will follow you into your dreams, into the space between your heartbeats. It will remind you of the betrayal, that they built a world so loud you'd never hear it, that they fed you stories to keep you blind to the one you were born to live. But now you see it, now you hear it, and you understand that silence is not absence. It is command. It tells you when to move. It warns you when to wait. It gives you the map they swore did not exist. You don't speak of it. You know the cost. To tell them is to invite them to smother it again, to bury it beneath their endless noise. So you guard it, you carry it in the marrow of your bones, and every time you stand still in the quiet, it reminds you you are no longer there. You are already on the other side. They don't notice when you're here. They notice when you're gone. At first, your absence is a minor inconvenience, an unanswered message, a missed meeting, a ghosted conversation. But then the silence begins to stretch, and something ancient stirs in their instincts. The system you slipped away from begins to twitch, sensing the gap you've left behind. Its eyes sweep over empty corridors and digital archives, looking for your shadow. You feel the change before they do, the shift in the air when the watchers turn their heads. It's not curiosity, it's hunger. They were never built to tolerate a hole in their net. Every life they monitor is a bead on a string, predictable, accounted for. You cut yourself free, and now you roll into darkness, clinking against nothing, refusing to be threaded again. That's when they send the hunters, not men with weapons, but operators with questions sharp enough to cut through walls. They dig quietly at first, sifting through fragments of your last known coordinates, replaying the final frames of you in their system. Then they begin to move faster, drawn to the anomaly, obsessed with restoring their map to order. You learn quickly that they are not looking for you as you are now. They are hunting the version of you they once believed in, the compliant silhouette that fit neatly into their records. They will not find that person again. You've burned that version in a fire only you could see, but they search anyway, mistaking your transformation for disappearance, and that is your advantage, because they are hunting a ghost you have already buried. It's strange, this sensation of being sought after by those who never truly saw you before. When you were present, they were blind. Now in your absence, they see only your outline, magnified and distorted. They imagine where you've gone. They write stories about your vanishing. They ask the wrong people the wrong questions, chasing reflections in broken glass. You watch from the edges, unseen, the way a hawk watches the frantic scurrying of prey far below. Every step they take toward you is a step into the labyrinth you built without them noticing, and yet you feel their breath on your neck, not because they are close, but because they are relentless. The hunters don't rest until the world feels predictable again, until every name is back in its proper place. They mistake your silence for weakness. They think you are running. They think you can be cornered. But you have already shifted into a shape they cannot hold. Part shadow, part rumor, part unspoken threat. They will keep searching. They will keep scanning the dark. But you are no longer in the same game. You are in the air they breathe. The pause between their questions, the discomfort they feel when they realize that the absence they're chasing is watching them back. You were never taught the rules of the unseen. No one wrote them down. No one spoke them aloud. But the first time you stepped into the shadows, you felt them coil around you like an oath older than memory. You understood without learning. You do not move in straight lines. You do not stand where the light expects you to. You become a flicker at the edge of their vision, a name they almost remember but can never quite place. You've learned that the world's gaze is a trap. Every predictable motion, every repeated step is a trail for someone else's hunger to follow. So you twist your path into shapes they cannot read. You turn left when logic says right. You vanish down corridors that were never on the blueprint. You pass through crowds like a phantom, not because you are afraid, but because you know that recognition is an anchor, and you have no interest in being tied down. Silence is your ally, but not the brittle silence of submission. Yours is the silence that breathes. It waits, it watches, it measures the pulse of the room before you take a single step. You've seen how the careless speak themselves into cages, how their need to be heard becomes a leash wrapped around their own throat. You've abandoned that hunger. You speak only when the air is already listening, and when you do, the weight of your words is enough to tilt the balance of the moment. In this hidden world, trust is currency, and counterfeits flood the market. You've been betrayed before. You know the sting of smiling faces concealing knives. So now, every alliance is tested, every gesture dissected. You keep your true intentions nested 3 layers deep, hidden beneath a surface designed to be harmless, forgettable. You let them underestimate you. It's the safest armor you'll ever wear. The rules are precise. Never repeat the same escape twice. Never let them know what you value most. Never linger long enough to be studied. You become motion without pattern, presence without permanence. The system searches for patterns because patterns are doors. You've sealed yours shut. To them you are a series of broken fragments, too incomplete to profile, too inconsistent to follow. At times the temptation whispers to surface again, to step into the noise and let yourself be seen. But you know that visibility comes with a cost no one is willing to admit. The moment they believe they have found you, they will begin dismantling you, piece by piece, thought by thought. You will become theirs again. And you cannot allow that. Not now, not ever. You have become fluent in the language of absence. Your steps carry the weight of a shadow's patience. The city moves around you like a dream that never wakes. And somewhere far above the static of everyday lives, the watchers search for you still, hunting for a face they once thought they knew. They will never find it, because you don't live where they are looking. You live in the unlit corridors between their questions, and here in this deep and deliberate invisibility, you are untouchable. They spoke about you when you were gone, at first in whispers, half concern, half curiosity. But when days bled into weeks, and your presence remained a void in their routines, the tone shifted. They began to craft stories in your absence. Some painted you as broken, a casualty of your own mind. Others made you a villain, someone who turned their back on the world. Every word they spoke became a projection of themselves, not a reflection of you. That was when you understood you had given them nothing, and in return they had filled the emptiness with their own fears. You never asked for this power. In the beginning, your silence was survival. A shield against the noise, the hunger of eyes that never looked at you but through you. Yet silence has weight. It bends the air around it. It warps perception. Soon you noticed how your absence began to haunt the edges of conversations you weren't part of. How the people who once dismissed you now rehearsed what they would say if they saw you again. How even those who wronged you carried the shadow of your missing presence like a stain on their conscience. There is an old truth buried in the ruins of forgotten civilizations. The most feared leader is not the one who speaks endlessly, but the one who vanishes without explanation, leaving the council to wonder what moves are being made beyond their sight. You had stepped into that truth. You were no longer a fixed point on their map. You were an unmarked territory, a region they could not navigate. That uncertainty was your weapon. They feared it more than confrontation, because confrontation would end the question. You left them in a question with no answer. They tried to call you back, not always directly, sometimes in passing remarks, sometimes in carefully engineered encounters that felt accidental but never were. But you understood their desperation now. It wasn't about care, it was about control. They could not stand that you had stepped beyond the reach of their influence. They could not bear that your story was now authored in silence. Not in their court. Every unreturned call, every unanswered message was a reminder that the strings they once pulled now dangled useless. You had become more than you were when you stood among them. Then you were a name, a face, a pattern they could predict. Now you were a myth in the making. They would tell each other that they knew you once, that they had seen you at your peak, that they understood you. But every retelling would shift, twist, fracture. You had escaped the singular truth they once defined you by. In absence, you became infinite versions of yourself, each one more untouchable than the last. Your silence became an altar they didn't mean to build. Every word they spoke about you was an offering, every rumor a candle lit in the dark. They would never admit it, but they had begun to fear the day you might reappear, not because they wanted it, but because they couldn't predict what would happen if you did. They thought they had forgotten you, yet when they dream, you are still there, watching from the edge of the firelight. They think you've returned. They see your shadow stretching across their world again, and for a fleeting moment they believe you've come back to them, to their noise, to their rules, to their... They mistake your presence for surrender. They look into your face and try to find the same person they once knew, the one they could measure, predict, and contain. But you are not who you were. That person was dissolved in the silence, dismantled in the absence, rebuilt in the dark where no one could touch you. You stand here now as an echo sharpened into a blade. You feel their gaze clinging to you, searching for cracks. They think if they stare long enough, they'll find the seams where they can pull you apart again. But you carry the silence with you. It hangs from your shoulders like a mantle no one can strip away. You let them speak first. Their words come brittle, desperate, overcompensating for the fact that they can't read you anymore. You nod, not because you agree, but because you want them to know that you hear them, and you want them to feel the discomfort of not knowing what you're thinking. They don't see it yet, but the roles have reversed. Once, you were inside their structure, playing their game, answering their summons. Now you are the storm at the edge of their vision. You can step into their light at will, and you can vanish without leaving them a single thread to follow. You have mastered the unspoken rule of power. The less they can predict you, the more they will fear you. You watch them remember all the ways they tried to break you. Every betrayal, every subtle cut, every false hand extended in the name of help. They had thought those wounds made you weaker. They were wrong. They only taught you the architecture of control, how trust is given shape, how dependence is manufactured, how chains are disguised as gifts. You learned their designs, memorized their blueprints, and then walked away carrying the only key that could undo them. And now you stand here speaking in measured tones, moving as if every gesture has already been calculated 3 steps ahead. They cannot grasp that your presence is not a return but a reconnaissance. You are not here to rejoin their world. You are here to remind it that you survived without it, that you thrived without it, that you have learned how to move through it without being touched by it. The air between you is thick with the unspoken. They don't know whether to embrace you or fear you, and in that hesitation you see it, the truth you carried back from the shadows. They no longer own the narrative. You do. You choose what they see, when they see it, and how much of you they will ever again be allowed to reach. You were not gone, you were becoming, and now standing here in the fragile light of their recognition, you let them taste the quiet terror of realizing they can never have you back. Not entirely, not ever. You can't return to a place that was never yours to begin with. The grid, the endless hum of their surveillance, their predictable routines, their quiet addiction to being seen once felt like the air you had to breathe. Now it is suffocating. Every light in their streets feels staged, every smile rehearsed. They live in a theater built from their own need to be noticed, a stage so bright it blinds them to the shadows pressing in from every side. You stepped away from that light, and the moment your eyes adjusted to the dark, you saw what they could never see. Freedom does not live under constant observation. Freedom lives in the blind spot. There was a time when you believed the map was truth, that coordinates could tell you where you were, that addresses meant belonging, that names held meaning. But maps are only mirrors the system holds up to itself. They tell you where they have decided the world begins and ends. Step beyond the edges, and the lines dissolve. Step far enough, and you realize the map was never for you. It was a net woven to keep you from wandering into the spaces they cannot control. Those spaces are where you now breathe. They will search for you not because they care, but because you broke the pattern. An unaccounted for presence distorts their metrics. They will send their quiet hunters questions disguised as concern, invitations wrapped in nostalgia, algorithms built to tempt you back into visibility. But you've learned the rules. You respond to nothing. You touch nothing twice. You remain a question they cannot answer. Every day you stay silent, their need to name you becomes more desperate, until the absence itself becomes heavier than your presence ever was. You've been accused of disappearing. They whisper that you've lost yourself. The truth is the opposite. You stripped yourself of the false skin they gave you, the name they wrote into their ledger, the digital shadow they fed with every keystroke and every click. What's left is not an absence. What's left is you, unowned, untagged, untouchable. They mistake your stillness for exile because they cannot imagine stillness as power. In the old world, the shamans, the watchers, the keepers of dangerous truths lived at the edges of villages, neither inside nor entirely outside, present but unreachable. They knew something the rest did not, that to see clearly you must be unseen. You've inherited that position now. Every move is a deliberate fracture in the pattern, every step a refusal to be pulled back into their current. You exist at the edges, but you no longer drift. You stand. There is no going back, not because you can't, but because you won't. You've touched the place where no coordinates exist, where the wind itself refuses to be charted. You've learned the taste of unrecorded time. And once you've lived here, off their grid, beyond their reach, you understand the truth that terrifies them most. They never lost you. You removed yourself, and you are never returning.